The morning briefing at Jagdgeschwader 26's command post near Abbeville, France, had the tense atmosphere that characterized spring 1943. Major Gerhard Schopfel stood before a map of northwestern France, listening to intelligence reports that seemed increasingly absurd. His experienced pilots, veterans of campaigns from Poland to the Eastern Front, exchanged skeptical glances as the briefing officer described the new American fighter. 8 heavy machine guns, the intelligence officer repeated, consulting captured documents, each firing 800 rounds per minute. Total ammunition load of 2,800 rounds. Hauptmann Joseph Pips Priller, who would eventually command JG-26 and become one of Germany's most decorated fighter pilots, interrupted with characteristic bluntness. That's impossible. A single-engine fighter cannot carry that weight and still fly effectively. The Americans are feeding us disinformation. But Priller was wrong. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was real, and its firepower exceeded even the inflated intelligence estimates. More significantly, one P-47 carried more firepower than an entire Staffel, a squadron of 12 Messerschmitt Bf109s, could bring to bear in sustained combat. The mathematics were straightforward but revolutionary. A standard Bf109 G6, the primary Luftwaffe fighter in Western Europe during 1943, carried one 30mm Mk108 cannon firing through the propeller hub with 60 rounds, and two 13mm MG131 machine guns mounted above the engine with 300 rounds each. Some variants substituted the 30mm for a 20mm MG151 over 20 with 150 rounds. The total ammunition weight for a fully loaded Bf109 G6 was approximately 175 pounds. A 12-aircraft Staffel, assuming full ammunition loads and no mechanical failures, possessed 720 rounds of 13mm ammunition and 720 rounds of cannon ammunition, either 30mm or 20mm, depending on variant. If all 12 aircraft fired simultaneously in perfect coordination, they could sustain fire for approximately 45 seconds before exhausting their cannon ammunition and perhaps 90 seconds before depleting machine gun rounds. One P-47D carried 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition in its standard late-war configuration. At the standard rate of fire, approximately 750 to 850 rounds per minute per gun, depending on altitude and temperature, a P-47 could fire continuously for roughly 30 seconds. But this comparison of firing duration missed the critical point: hitting power. The 50 caliber Browning M2 fired a 1.6-ounce projectile at 2,840 feet per second. The kinetic energy delivered per round was approximately 13,350 foot-pounds. 8 guns firing simultaneously delivered a combined kinetic energy of 106,800 foot-pounds per second into the target area. Over a 5-second burst, a P-47 delivered approximately 534,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy through roughly 530 projectiles. The Bf109's 13mm MG131 fired a 1.2-ounce projectile at 2,460 feet per second, delivering approximately 7,900 foot-pounds per round. The 30mm Mk108 fired a 11.5-ounce explosive shell at only 1,640 feet per second, slow by machine gun standards, delivering approximately 3,400 foot-pounds of kinetic energy plus. Explosive effects. The 20mm MG151 over 20 fell between these extremes with a 4-ounce shell at 2,600 feet per second, delivering roughly 11,700 foot-pounds plus explosive charge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In a 5-second engagement, a single Bf109 G6 with the 13mm configuration could fire approximately 10 rounds of 30mm and 50 rounds of 13mm, delivering roughly 429,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy plus explosive effects. The P-47 delivered more raw kinetic energy and, more importantly, delivered it through a far greater number of projectiles, creating multiple impact points. The explosive shells carried by the Bf109 provided additional, destructive effect, approximately 10 grams of high explosive in the 30 mm and 18 grams in the 20 mm. This theoretically made each hit more destructive, but landing hits required ammunition, and German pilots entered combat knowing they had perhaps 12 firing opportunities with their 30 mm cannon before running dry. For an entire staffel of 12 Bf109s, the combined firepower in a 5-second simultaneous burst totaled approximately 5.15 million foot-pounds. Impressive, until compared to what would happen if those 12 aircraft faced 12 P-47 seconds, delivering combined 6.4 million foot-pounds with 6,360 projectiles versus the German unit's 1,320 projectiles. But the real disparity wasn't in single engagement firepower, it was in sustained combat capability. After one engagement, the Bf109 Staffel had depleted roughly 10% of its cannon ammunition and 5% of its machine gun ammunition. After 10 such engagements, a typical combat patrol might involve 3 to 5 engagement. The opportunities, the Staffel's cannons were empty, reduced to 13 mm machine guns alone. The P-47 squadron, after 10 5-second bursts, had expended 5,300 rounds, leaving 2,100 rounds remaining more than 60% of its ammunition. P-47 pilots could and did fire longer bursts with less concern for ammunition conservation. German pilots counted every round. Luftwaffe pilot training emphasized ammunition discipline. Gunnery instructors taught the 3-second rule: never fire for more than 3 seconds without breaking off to assess results and reposition. This wasn't just tactical wisdom, it was necessity imposed by limited ammunition. Pilots learned to fire in 1 to 2 second bursts, aiming for deflection shots at 200 to 300 meters range, where the 20 mm and 30 mm shells' higher destructive power compensated for lower hit probability. American P-47 pilots learned a different doctrine. Get close and hold the trigger down became standard advice. With 3,400 rounds available, pilots could afford longer bursts. The 8.50 calibers created a beaten zone, the area where bullets impacted roughly 30 feet in diameter at 300 yards. This meant less precise aiming was required, point generally at the target, fire, and the sheer volume of projectiles ensured hits. The German approach required superior marksmanship. American abundance substituted firepower for precision. Both methods could be effective, but the American method tolerated pilot error better. A mediocre shot in a P-47 could still achieve kills through volume of fire. A mediocre shot in a Bf109 might never score a victory before being shot down. These mathematical realities remained theoretical until combat proved them. The first major engagement between P-47 seconds and Bf109s over France in May 1943 shocked German pilots. Oberleutnant Adolf Galland, general of fighters for the Luftwaffe, received field reports describing streams of tracer fire that seemed continuous rather than intermittent bursts. The American ammunition loading pattern amplified psychological effects. Standard P-47 ammunition belts alternated 4 armor-piercing incendiary rounds with 1 tracer. Every 5th bullet glowed visibly in flight. When 8 guns fired simultaneously at 800 rounds per minute, observers saw roughly 1,280 visible tracers per minute, more than 21 tracers per second, creating the illusion of solid beams of light converging on targets. German pilots seeing this for the first time reported it as multiple aircraft firing simultaneously. The psychological impact of facing what appeared to be endless streams of fire affected decision-making. Aggressive attacks that worked against Spitfires became suicidal against P-47 seconds. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine evolved rapidly. JG-26 and JG-2, the primary fighter units defending France, developed new approach methods. Instead of stern attacks from behind where P-47 firepower was most effective, German pilots emphasized high-speed slashing attacks from above and ahead, firing during the brief window when closing speed exceeded 400 miles per hour, then diving away before P-47 seconds could return fire. These tactics reduced German casualties, but also reduced effectiveness against bombers. The same high-speed passes that kept fighters safe didn't allow sustained fire at bomber formations. American doctrine accepted this trade-off. If German fighters were forced into ineffective tactics, the bombers got through. The ammunition disparity created strategic effects beyond tactical engagements. A P-47 group of 48 aircraft carried 163,200 rounds total. A comparable Bf109 grupper of 48 aircraft carried approximately 43,200 rounds of machine gun and cannon ammunition combined. The American unit possessed nearly 4 times the ammunition, with each round delivering comparable or superior kinetic energy. Supply logistics magnified this advantage. American forward airfields in England maintained 500,000 round reserves per squadron. A 48-aircraft P-47 group typically had 3 squadrons, meaning 1.5 million rounds in reserve. This permitted pilots to fire liberally without supply concerns. German fighter units operated on 3-day ammunition reserves at best, often less. By late 1943, Luftwaffe units in France received ammunition shipments weekly when rail transport allowed. American interdiction of rail networks meant German units sometimes went days without resupply. P-47 seconds. Destroying ammunition trains created cascading effects. Reduced German ammunition availability meant less air combat training, which reduced pilot proficiency, which increased casualties, which depleted experienced pilots faster. The industrial foundation supporting P-47 firepower was invisible to German pilots but fundamental to American success. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri produced 1.6 billion 50-caliber rounds annually by 1943 from a single facility. This exceeded total German aircraft ammunition production of all calibers combined. Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia, Des Moines Ordnance Plant in Iowa, and Twin Cities Ordnance Plant in Minnesota provided additional capacity. Combined American production exceeded 10 billion 50-caliber rounds during the war. German production of all aircraft weapons ammunition, 7.92 mm, 13 mm, 15 mm, 20 mm, 30 mm, totaled approximately 4 billion rounds for the entire war. Americans produced more of their single heavy machine gun caliber than Germany produced of everything combined. This wasn't slight numerical advantage, it was overwhelming industrial supremacy. Quality control differences were equally significant. American ammunition underwent multiple inspections, with rejection rates of 2 to 3% for failing to meet precise specifications. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch were maintained across billions of rounds. Any round varying from specifications was rejected, melted down, and remanufactured. German ammunition quality declined throughout the war. Increasing reliance on forced labor and substitute materials, copper shortages, forced use of steel cartridge cases prone to jamming meant higher malfunction rates. By late 1943, Luftwaffe pilots reported jam rates of 5 to 8% with cannon ammunition, occasionally higher. This meant the already limited ammunition was further reduced by malfunctions. American 50 caliber reliability was extraordinary. Malfunction rates below 0.1% were standard. P-47 pilots trusted their guns absolutely. German pilots never knew if their cannons would fire reliably, adding psychological stress to already overwhelming material disadvantage. The 8 Browning M2s represented more than doubled or quadrupled firepower compared to German fighters. They represented systematic industrial superiority in design, manufacturing, ammunition production, quality control, logistics, and supply chain management. Every aspect of the system worked better than German equivalents. When German intelligence finally accepted that single P-47 seconds genuinely carried 8 50-caliber guns with 3,400 rounds, the implications were staggering. American industrial capacity exceeded German comprehension. The ability to mount such armament on mass-produced fighters, available in unlimited quantities, suggested resources beyond German ability to counter. Galland, reading field reports in his headquarters, understood immediately. Germany was fighting an industrial giant that could afford to be wasteful with ammunition because production exceeded any possible consumption rate. German fighters conserved ammunition from necessity. American fighters fired freely from abundance. This fundamental difference couldn't be overcome through superior tactics or pilot skill. The Staffel comparison became grimly relevant in actual combat. A German fighter unit of 12 Bf109s engaging equal numbers of P-47's faced not just numerical parity but firepower inferiority. The mathematical analysis proved accurate in practice. German pilots learned to avoid engagement with P-47's. Unless circumstances were overwhelmingly favorable altitude advantage, numerical superiority, surprise. Even then, the 8.50 calibers meant any P-47 that got its nose pointed at a German fighter became immediately lethal. The beaten zone created by 8 guns firing was large enough that precise deflection shooting wasn't required. American pilots learned to point, fire, and let volume compensate for imperfect aim. This wasn't the way German pilots were taught to fight. Their entire training, tactical doctrine, and cultural approach to aerial combat emphasized precision, efficiency, and conservation. American methods seemed wasteful, even crude. But crude methods backed by unlimited resources proved more effective than elegant techniques constrained by scarcity. The fundamental lesson German pilots learned, usually too late, was that modern warfare had evolved beyond individual combat skill. Industrial capacity determined outcomes. The 8.50 calibers were messengers of this new reality. A reality where American factories outproduced German capacity by orders of magnitude, where ammunition arrived in unlimited quantities, where losses could be immediately replaced. One P-47 matching an entire Bf109 Staffel's firepower wasn't slight exaggeration. It was mathematical reality that symbolized industrial disparity, determining the war's outcome. The supply chain supporting P-47 firepower began 4,000 miles from European battlefields, in facilities that dwarfed anything Germany possessed. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant sprawled across 3,935 acres near Independence, Missouri, employing 20,000 workers in 3 continuous shifts. The facility operated 24 hours daily, 365 days annually, producing 50 caliber ammunition at rates German industry couldn't comprehend. Inside temperature-controlled buildings covering millions of square feet, automated machinery transformed raw, brass, lead, and steel into finished ammunition. A single 50 caliber cartridge required 47 separate manufacturing operations, each held to tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. The entire process from raw materials to finished ammunition took approximately 4 hours per lot. Quality control inspectors, predominantly women who proved more meticulous than male counterparts, checked every stage. Cartridge cases were gauged for dimensional accuracy. Primers tested for sensitivity. Bullets weighed individually. Powder charges measured precisely. Completed rounds underwent pressure testing, accuracy testing, and environmental testing, simulating altitude and temperature extremes. Rejection rates averaged 2.3%, approximately 37 million rounds annually at Lake City alone. These rejected rounds weren't wasted. They were disassembled, materials reclaimed, and remanufactured. Nothing was discarded. The rejected 37 million rounds, if reclaimed and reproduced successfully, exceeded total annual German fighter ammunition production of all calibers. Lake City's 1.6 billion annual production capacity meant the facility produced enough ammunition to load every P-47 inches Europe every single day with rounds left over. In practice, ammunition production so vastly exceeded consumption that American forces never faced shortage. Forward supply depots in England stockpiled ammunition in quantities measured by trainloads, An average P-47 group of 48 aircraft maintained ready reserves of 1.5 million rounds, enough for 30 days of maximum intensity operations without resupply. Actual resupply arrived weekly by the shipload. Liberty ships crossing the Atlantic carried mixed cargoes, including millions of rounds of 50 caliber ammunition as routine freight. The contrast with German supply could not have been starker. Luftwaffe fighter units in France operated on 3-day ammunition reserves when supply chains functioned properly. By late 1943, Allied interdiction of rail networks meant ammunition often arrived late or not at all. Units faced situations where serviceable aircraft sat grounded because cannon ammunition hadn't arrived. German ammunition production was dispersed across occupied Europe. Factories in Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and France produced various calibers and types. This dispersion, intended to protect against Allied bombing, created coordination nightmares. Different facilities maintained different quality standards. Some factories operated with forced labor, deliberately sabotaging production. The 20mm Oerlikon cannon, license-produced as the Mgon 151/20, required ammunition manufactured to extremely tight tolerances. Variations in shell dimensions caused jamming. By 1943, Luftwaffe armament reports documented malfunction rates exceeding 8% with 20mm ammunition from certain production facilities. This meant 1 in 12 rounds failed to fire or jammed the weapon. The 30mm Mk108, devastating against bombers, was even more problematic. Its low-velocity design, optimized for maximum explosive charge, required precise ammunition dimensions. Malfunction rates of 10% were common, occasionally spiking to 15% with ammunition from forced labor facilities. German pilots firing their 60-round capacity might experience 6 to 9 malfunctions, reducing effective ammunition to as few as 51 rounds. American 50 caliber malfunction rates, by contrast, averaged 0.08%, less than 1 malfunction per 1,000 rounds. A P-47 pilot firing all 3,400 rounds might experience 3. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Malfunctions. More importantly, the Browning M2's design meant most malfunctions were cleared automatically by continued firing. The disintegrating link belt system meant a failed round was ejected without affecting subsequent rounds. German belt systems retained links, adding weight and complexity. A malfunction often required manually clearing the weapon, impossible in combat. German pilots, experiencing gun jams, frequently had to break off engagement, reducing combat effectiveness even beyond the direct impact of the malfunction itself. The Browning M2's reliability stemmed from design philosophy and manufacturing quality. John Browning's 1918 design had been refined over 25 years into a weapon of extraordinary robustness. The gun had only 42 moving parts, each designed with generous tolerances, allowing operation in extreme conditions while maintaining accuracy. Manufacturing quality ensured truly interchangeable parts. Any component from any gun fit perfectly in any other gun. This interchangeability was achieved through precision manufacturing held to tolerances of 0.001 inches across millions of components. German weapons manufacturing, still influenced by craftsman traditions, never achieved this standardization level. The industrial implications were profound. A damaged P-47 could have all 8 guns replaced with spares in under 4 hours. The replacement guns, pulled from depot stocks, were guaranteed to function identically to originals. Harmonization, aligning guns to converge at specific ranges, could be maintained because replacement guns were truly identical to removed guns. German fighters required individual harmonization of each weapon installation. Replacement weapons didn't quite match originals, forcing rework of mounting points and sight alignment. What should have been 2-hour repairs often took 2 days. This reduced operational aircraft availability, compounding numerical disadvantage with serviceability problems. Republic Aviation's manufacturing approach matched ammunition production philosophy, mass production, without compromise in quality. The Farmingdale, New York facility covered 765,000 square feet of production floor space. An additional facility in Evansville, Indiana added 750,000 square feet. Combined capacity exceeded 400 P-47 seconds monthly by late 1943. The production line approach meant each aircraft was essentially identical. This wasn't merely convenience, it was fundamental military advantage. Pilot training in the United States transferred directly to combat aircraft in Europe because the aircraft were truly identical. Maintenance procedures were standardized. Parts were universally interchangeable. A typical P-47 group maintained complete spare engines, propeller assemblies, and major components. A battle-damaged aircraft could be completely rebuilt using depot stocks in under a week. German units, by contrast, cannibalized damaged aircraft for parts because replacement components weren't available. By late 1944, Luftwaffe serviceability rates in Western Europe fell below 50%. Fewer than half the aircraft assigned to units were flyable on any given day. American P-47 groups routinely maintained 85% serviceability. This meant American numerical superiority was even greater than raw production numbers suggested. The supply infrastructure extended beyond ammunition and aircraft to every consumable. Engine oil arrived by the barrel. Hydraulic fluid, coolant, oxygen, and hundreds of other items flowed continuously from American industry, through supply depots to forward airfields. The complexity of maintaining this supply chain was staggering, and it worked flawlessly. German logistics, strained by multi-front warfare and Allied interdiction, broke down repeatedly. Luftwaffe units in France occasionally lacked fuel despite serviceable aircraft. They lacked ammunition despite flyable missions. They lacked spare parts despite damaged aircraft awaiting repair. Each shortage reduced effectiveness, even when aircraft and pilots were available. The 8.50 calibers on each P-47 were supported by this vast infrastructure. The guns themselves were products of advanced tool and manufacturing company facilities. Colt Manufacturing, Frigidaire division of General Motors, and other contractors producing Browning M2s under license. Combined production exceeded 2 million units during the war. This meant P-47 seconds shot down or damaged beyond repair had their salvaged guns immediately installed in replacement aircraft or depot stocks. Nothing was wasted. The circular flow of materials from factory to aircraft to salvage to depot to aircraft again demonstrated industrial efficiency Germany couldn't match. Ammunition belting, loading individual rounds into belts, was performed at forward airfields by armament crews. A typical P-47 squadron's armament section consisted of 30 specialists who could rearm all squadron aircraft in under 3 hours. The process was standardized. Extract empty ammunition boxes, install loaded boxes, check feed mechanisms, test fire when possible, and sign off. 3 hours after landing, aircraft were ready for another mission. German fighter armament was more complex. Different weapons required different procedures. The 20mm and 30mm cannons used drum magazines or belt systems that were manually loaded, a time-consuming process requiring 30 to 45 minutes per aircraft. German ground crews, increasingly depleted by conscription, couldn't match American efficiency. The Americans also maintained higher ammunition quality through the supply chain. Ammunition loaded into aircraft in England was identical to ammunition test-fired at Lake City months earlier. Temperature-controlled storage preserved propellant stability. Moisture-proof packaging prevented corrosion. The ammunition P-47 pilots fired was effectively perfect. German ammunition quality degraded in storage. Moisture penetration affected propellants. Corrosion affected primers. The ammunition loaded into German fighters was not identical to ammunition produced at factories. Storage and handling degraded quality. This contributed to higher malfunction rates and reduced confidence in weapons. American abundance extended to training. Newly arrived P-47 pilots in England conducted live-fire training at gunnery ranges, expending thousands of practice runs. This training ammunition was separate from combat allocations. It didn't reduce rounds available for missions. German pilots by 1943 received minimal live-fire training due to ammunition shortages. Many entered combat having fired their guns fewer than 10 times. The psychological impact of abundant ammunition cannot be overstated. American pilots knew they had 3,400 rounds available. They knew reserves at their airfield numbered in the millions. They knew production exceeded any possible consumption. This confidence affected tactics. American pilots could afford to fire long bursts, to engage multiple targets, to pursue damaged enemies until destroyed. German pilots counted every round. They knew that after 60 rounds of 30mm, their primary weapon was empty. They knew resupply was uncertain. They knew ammunition shortages were worsening. This anxiety affected tactics. German pilots held fire until certain of hits, broke off engagements when ammunition ran low, avoided combat unless absolutely necessary. The morale effects rippled through both air forces. American pilots felt supported by limitless resources. German pilots felt abandoned by failing logistics. These psychological factors influenced combat effectiveness as much as hardware differences. By 1944, the ammunition disparity had become absurd. A single P-47 group in England possessed more ready ammunition than entire Luftwaffe Geschwaders defending Germany. The American group could sustain maximum intensity operations for weeks. The German Geschwader would be out of ammunition in days. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated these supply realities. When weather cleared on December 23rd, American fighters flew thousands of sorties. P-47 seconds alone fired over 2 million rounds in ground attack and air combat missions over 5 days. This exceeded total German fighter ammunition reserves for the entire Western Front. German fighters flew fewer than 100 sorties per day during the same period, severely constrained by fuel and ammunition shortages. The few sorties flown were rationed. Pilots were ordered to engage only when circumstances were favorable, to conserve scarce resources for decisive moments that never came. The industrial capacity supporting P-47 firepower represented American economic power applied to warfare. The same industrial base producing 50 caliber ammunition by the billion was producing trucks by the million, ships by the thousand, and aircraft by the tens of thousands. This integrated industrial economy, immune to enemy attack and operating at full capacity, was something Germany could never match. When German pilots faced P-47 seconds, they weren't just facing 8 machine guns. They were facing the entire American industrial economy, symbolized by those guns. Every burst of 50 caliber fire represented factories, workers, supply chains, and resources beyond German ability to counter. The 8 guns were warning that Germany had chosen to fight an enemy with effectively infinite material resources. This realization came too late to change outcomes, but early enough to demoralize an entire generation of German fighter pilots who understood they were doomed not by inferior skill or courage, but by overwhelming industrial disparity that no amount of bravery could overcome. The theoretical firepower advantages of the P-47 required validation in combat. That validation came decisively through 1,943 and 1,944 as American and German fighters met over Western Europe. The results were unambiguous. One P-47 consistently outperformed multiple Bf109s in sustained combat, confirming the mathematics of firepower superiority. Major Gerald Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group recorded the practical reality in his mission report from the 19th of August, 1943. His flight of 4 P-47 seconds engaged an estimated 16 Bf109s over Belgium. The German formation attempted a coordinated attack on B-17 bombers. Johnson's flight intercepted from altitude, diving into the German formation with all guns firing. "We opened fire at 400 yards, Johnson wrote. The combined fire from our flight appeared as solid streams of tracers. 109 seconds disintegrated immediately. I observed one break apart at the wing roots, another exploded, a third went into an inverted spin trailing debris. The remaining enemy aircraft broke formation and dove away. Total engagement time was approximately 20 seconds. 4 P-47 seconds, firing simultaneously, put 32 .50 caliber guns into action. At 800 rounds per minute per gun, this meant 25,600 rounds per minute theoretical rate, approximately 427 rounds per second. In Johnson's 20-second engagement, his flight fired approximately 8,540 rounds. The German formation of 16 Bf109s, if they had fired back, reports indicate they didn't, possessed approximately 4,800 rounds of machine gun and 2,400 rounds of cannon ammunition total. The 4 P-47 seconds outgunned 16 Bf109s in that engagement. The results confirmed firepower, disparity. 3 German fighters destroyed in 20 seconds, the rest fleeing. The American flight returned to base with approximately 75% of ammunition remaining, ready for another engagement. Had those 16 Bf109s stood and fought, they would have depleted cannon ammunition in under a minute, while the 4 P-47 seconds could have sustained fire for several minutes. This engagement pattern repeated thousands of times. Luftwaffe pilots learned that engaging equal or near equal numbers of P-47 seconds was suicidal unless circumstances were overwhelmingly favorable. German tactical doctrine evolved to emphasize hit-and-run attacks, preferably from altitude advantage, firing briefly, then diving away before American fighters could respond. These tactics reduced German casualties, but also reduced effectiveness against bombers, the primary mission. If German fighters were forced into defensive tactics by escort fighters, the bombers got through. American doctrine accepted this trade-off. The P-47's firepower effectively neutralized German fighter defenses, even when German aircraft weren't destroyed. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock of JG-11, who survived the war and wrote extensively about his experiences, described the psychological impact of facing P-47 firepower. "The Americans fire continuously as they attack," he wrote. "Tracers fill the air like rain. To fly through their fire seems impossible, yet one must if the bombers are to be reached. Many pilots refuse. They attack the escorts instead, or claim engine problems and return to base. Who can blame them? The mathematics are against us." Noak's mathematics referred to ammunition disparity, but also to loss rates. By late 1943, JG-11 was suffering 40% monthly casualties, nearly half the unit's pilots killed, wounded, or missing each month. Replacement pilots arrived with minimal training, often shot down on their first or second missions. Experienced pilots like Noak survived through caution, picking engagements carefully, avoiding unnecessary risks. American P-47 groups suffered losses too, but at sustainable rates. The 56th Fighter Group, which flew P-47 seconds exclusively throughout the European campaign, lost approximately 120 pilots killed or missing over 2 years of combat, roughly 5% monthly casualties against the German 40%. This disparity was partly tactics, partly training, and significantly firepower advantage. P-47 pilots could afford to be aggressive because their overwhelming firepower meant most engagements favored them. The 56th's commanding officer, Colonel Hubert Zemke, developed tactics maximizing firepower advantages. His Zemke fan spread squadron aircraft in wide formation, creating overlapping fields of fire. German fighters attempting to reach bombers had to penetrate zones where multiple P-47 seconds could engage simultaneously. The combined firepower of even 3 or 4 P-47 seconds made penetration nearly impossible without casualties. Zemke described his tactical philosophy. "We don't dogfight. We use speed, altitude, and firepower. A P-47 inches a turning fight with a 109 gives up its advantages. But a P-47 making a high-speed pass with all 8 guns firing is nearly unstoppable. The enemy must evade or die. Either way, the bombers are protected." This doctrine proved devastatingly effective. The 56th Fighter Group claimed 674 aerial victories by war's end, the highest-scoring American fighter group in Europe. These victories came almost exclusively through firepower superiority. Zemke's pilots weren't necessarily better dogfighters than German pilots. They were better equipped and better supported. The firepower advantage extended to ground attack, where P-47 seconds proved equally devastating. A single P-47 attacking a locomotive could deliver 800 to 1,000 rounds in a single pass, more firepower than an entire Staffel of Bf109s possessed for such missions. The 50 caliber armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate locomotive boilers, igniting steam explosions that destroyed the engine and often derailed following cars. German transportation networks faced systematic destruction. By late 1943, Luftwaffe units avoided rail movement during daylight due to P-47 interdiction. Ammunition, fuel, and spare parts shipments were delayed or destroyed. This created cascading logistics failures that reduced German combat effectiveness independent of actual aerial combat losses. Colonel Robert S. Johnson, second highest scoring P-47 ace in Europe with 27 victories, survived an engagement on the 26th of June 1943 that demonstrated both P-47 durability and firepower. After destroying a TEM-W190, Johnson's aircraft was hit by return fire from wingmen. More than 200 bullet holes perforated his P-47. Controls were damaged, canopy shattered, one gun destroyed. The German pilot pulled alongside to confirm the kill. Johnson's remaining 7 guns were functional. At 200 yards range, he opened fire. 2 seconds of fire from 7 guns, approximately 190 rounds, destroyed the German fighter. Johnson then flew his damaged P-47 200 miles back to England, landed safely, and was flying another P-47 the next day. His original aircraft was repaired using depot spare parts and returned to service within a week. This incident encapsulated American advantages. The aircraft absorbed damage that would have destroyed any German fighter. The pilot survived due to aircraft durability. Firepower remained sufficient even with 1 gun destroyed. Logistics supported rapid repair and return to combat. Every element of the system, aircraft design, pilot protection, maintenance, supply, worked better than German equivalents. By early 1944, Luftwaffe effectiveness against daylight bombing raids had collapsed. P-47 seconds, operating in coordinated groups with increasingly sophisticated tactics, created defensive barriers. German fighters couldn't penetrate without unsustainable losses. The introduction of P-51 Mustangs for long-range escort complemented rather than replaced P-47 seconds. The two types operated together. P-51 seconds provided range. P-47 seconds provided firepower and ground attack capability. The Normandy invasion in June 1944 provided ultimate demonstration of P-47 dominance. On D-Day, P-47 groups flew 2,398 sorties, claiming 84 German aircraft destroyed in air combat and 89 destroyed on the ground. More significantly, P-47 seconds achieved total air superiority over the invasion beaches. German fighters managed only 319 sorties over Normandy, outnumbered nearly 8-1 by American fighters alone, not counting British aircraft. The firepower displayed over Normandy was staggering. P-47 seconds attacked any moving vehicle, destroying tanks, trucks, artillery, and troop concentrations. The 50 calibers could penetrate light armor and destroy soft targets with single passes. German ground forces were paralyzed. Movement during daylight hours was suicidal. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in Normandy, wrote in a report shortly before being wounded by Allied aircraft, "The enemy has complete air supremacy. Movement is possible only at night. Our fighters are simply not present in sufficient numbers. The American Thunderbolt has made daytime operations impossible." Statistical analysis from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey quantified P-47 effectiveness. In over 746,000 sorties, P-47's destroyed or damaged approximately 68,000 German vehicles, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railway cars, and 6,000 armoured vehicles. Air-to-air, P-47's claimed 3,916 enemy aircraft destroyed in combat, with an additional 3,202 destroyed on the ground. Loss rates tell the other side of the story. Of 15,683 P-47's produced, approximately 3,499 were lost in combat or accidents, a loss rate of 0.47% per sortie flown. Luftwaffe fighter losses in the West during 1943 to 1944 exceeded 50% of assigned strength in several months. These disproportionate loss rates reflected firepower disparity, training differences, and logistical superiority. The human cost was unevenly distributed. American pilots who completed their tour rotated home to training duties. German pilots flew until killed, wounded, or captured. By late 1944, average Luftwaffe pilot experience in Western Europe had dropped below 100 flight hours, barely trained novices facing American veterans with 500-plus hours and multiple kills. Heinz Noack survived the war and wrote, "We knew from mid-1944 that we could not win. The Americans had too many aircraft, too much ammunition, too much of everything. Our new pilots lasted days. Some were shot down on their first mission. The Thunderbolt became a symbol of inevitable defeat when we saw them. We knew our situation was hopeless." Adolf Galland, General of Fighters, attempted various tactical innovations to counter American numerical and material superiority. The Sturmbok concept, heavily armed and armoured for 190s, concentrating firepower against bombers, failed because escort fighters like P-47's destroyed them before they reached targets. The Me-262 jet fighter provided speed advantage but insufficient firepower and reliability to change outcomes. By March 1945, Luftwaffe operations over Germany itself had become sporadic. Fuel shortages grounded most units. Those that flew faced overwhelming numbers. On March 24th, during Operation Varsity, the Rhine crossing, Allied air forces flew over 16,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe managed fewer than 100. Of these, approximately 40 were shot down. The 8-to-1 firepower advantage of individual P-47's was multiplied by 160-to-1 numerical advantage. The final verdict of combat validated every mathematical prediction. One P-47 consistently outperformed multiple Bf109s in sustained combat. The 8.50 caliber guns, supported by unlimited ammunition and superior logistics, proved more effective than theoretically superior German weapons constrained by scarcity. German tactical sophistication, pilot bravery, and technical innovation proved insufficient against industrial superiority. The P-47's firepower was ultimately irresistible because it represented not just 8 guns, but an entire economic system dedicated to producing unlimited weapons, ammunition, and aircraft. When historians analyze the Allied victory in Europe, the P-47 Thunderbolt appears prominently. Its contribution wasn't merely destroying German aircraft, though it did that effectively. Its larger contribution was demonstrating that modern warfare had evolved beyond individual combat skill to industrial capacity. The side with more resources, better logistics, and superior production capacity would prevail regardless of tactical sophistication. German pilots facing P-47's learned this lesson personally and painfully. The 8.50 calibers weren't just machine guns, they were messengers of a new form of warfare where industrial might determine outcomes. Each burst of fire demonstrated production capacity Nazi Germany could never match. The thunderous roar of 8 Brownings became to salve, the sound of inevitable defeat, a sound that echoed from American factories to European skies, forever changing military history.